Okay, so part two of our little weekly talks to get started up again. Let's see, we're running this here. Yep, just double check here. That's right. Okay, so um, this talk isn't as long as some of the other ones, I don't think, because in terms of just building partnerships. I've got some examples that I thought about, and in terms of how it affects some of the partnerships that we use, and it's kind of maybe I can talk a little bit more into that in terms of like where to form those partnerships as well. So actually, let me put in here. Uh, what would you call that? A conventions, and then the type of conventions to go to. Because you can convent. There's a different type of convention every week if you really wanted to put to it in terms of industry that you could correlate it to make it work. That said, um, it's one of the type of things you really don't want to get be too much of a distraction. But in terms of gaming wise, we can start there. First place to really look into building up some type of partnerships, or just getting yourself out there. Something like Games Developers Conference or the GDC. GDC typically occurs in San Francisco. It's typically pretty. It can be somewhat expensive, I believe. Attendance fees for the last one was around $400 or $500 per person. I think it could be less. If you're a student, it's considerably less. So that's one of the things. If you're a student and you actually want to take a type of trip or venture out to that one, that's a really good one to try out, especially as you're a student, so you can take advantage of those discounts and also start to help create some hopeful connections as you go. Because more often than not, when you go into these type of things, you're getting to see the next 2 to 3 years of what the plan the industry to look like, or the tools that will come out in it. It's almost like E3, but more tech driven is kind of how it felt for me a little bit when I used to go to GDC a lot. I don't go as much now, and now it's since COVID, so I'm hoping to start going back again. But nevertheless, GDC is always a good one. As I said before, E3 used to be a great one when it was more of an industry set, and when it got opened up to public, it got a bit more diluted and more market driven in terms of entertainment. Whereas before, it was pretty much showcasing the title that's going to be coming out within the next 6 to 8 months, or to a year, depending on the system. And it's just a good place to have those type of connections. Like for instance, uh, when I was at a place called Digital Addiction, we had a booth at E3, and it just so happens that we caught the eye of a executive producer at Electronic Arts because he liked our card game and how our card game played. As he was looking and playing it, he kept coming back to the booth and trying it out. And so for the next 3 days, we'd see him and start gathering conversation with him. Long story short, we ended up doing a prototype baseball game, collectible card based baseball game uh, that we made based off of the engine that we created for the collectible card system. Now, this was 1999, going into 2000s when this was. So this was well before the iPhone or distributable phones or high speed connections. You might have, like, if you had something like that, it was either satellite or a T1 line if you actually had some speed. But we were talking about before. We call them cable modems. I guess we still call them cable modems. But this was like right at dawn of the cable modem. So, in terms of access, not a lot of people had it, and that's anyway well before that. So I'd say we were about about I forgot when iPhone I think came out in 2008. So we were roughly almost a decade too soon in terms of development for that. But nevertheless, Electronic Arts paid us well for it, well over $250,000 to develop a prototype baseball game that was going to be sponsored by Topps Baseball. So they got us all of the cards, and we had digital versions of everything, and we placed those cards in instead of our other factions, and we literally made a baseball, you know, trade card game. So you could have a pitcher with a +2 fastball versus a base batter with a +5 slugger, and then have the math based off the percentages on how they would hit the ball would determine it, and then you could see it play out actually on the diamond. So it was kind of neat. It's something I'd love to like try to revisit, but nowadays the licensing fees would eat up all the profits, so maybe not. So anyway, things like that in terms of like when you're creating or looking to develop partnerships, you never know where it can come from. So for us, in that example was a example that happened from having a booth up at the E3 of all places. It's just so it was, we got business not based off of the sale of the game that we would had there, but the potential of having that same engine turn into something else. So you never know what type of conversations can happen from being at some of these things. So it's just something to look out to. But yeah, nowadays that stuff's been highly consolidated. Games Developers Conference, but then you also have your local networks or groups that you can go to, or which are extensions of GDC. They just happen to be local chapters of it. I believe Tronster is still highly active in that. So if you're very or interested in that in any way, shape or form, reach out to Tronster, and honestly, that'd be one of your first partnerships to start with. It's pretty much like I said about building relationships. The more you can build relationships and have people understand how competent or the type of work that you're about, the better off you are in the long run of things. Now, with that all being said, what I've got written up here is talking about building partnerships. Say, what can they provide that you don't have? Then that's pretty much the ideal set of a partnership. It's no good having a partnership where you already have a area or a team that makes really good 3D models, and all of a sudden, um, you meet up with a group that makes really good 3D models. You have to question how much value is that going to bring to your group. Now, if it's more of a technical um, boom in terms of optimization, maybe you can hand off some of the heavy work to a group like that. It might be worth it because then that's worth having there. So um, just something to think about in that regard. Like for instance, Horizon, I think it was a Horizon Zero Dawn. That's the post-apocalyptic mech type of game there. I forget the actual full name of it, but nevertheless, they had a team of retopologizers. Now, those retopologizers actually didn't work at Gorilla. They were more outsourced. So, come to find out, what they did is that they outsourced a team outside of Taiwan that pretty much worked on retopologizing um, every model or high density model that was sculpted or created for the title. And the way that it worked is that they pretty much worked 24/7 on the same machine. So it was pretty much a team of 30 people, and they would come in one day each, and then they would just take the place of the other person and then continue where they left off at. So you had this team of 30 different people coming in on different machines. I don't know how many actual number it was, but I do know it was a team of 30 retopologizers. And they would come in and work 24/7 on a list of actions that need to be done for optimizing the meshes of their games, which is one of the reasons why everything is so clean and so good looking there. They outsourced a ton of work that would have taken their local artists months, months of production time just to optimize and get the topology right off. So it's a very real thing when you're looking at those AAA titles that have large budgets and large assets to create. They're going to outsource that stuff. You can't these days do all of that internally. It's just not efficient. It's just not affordable to do it that way. Um, Even with the new tools that are coming out that allow you to do so much more with less, um, you really don't have the full luxury of being able to do full blown massive heavy lifting like that. Not just yet. I think the first domino to fall in terms of the 3D side of things is retopology. I think everybody that's been doing 3D modeling or 3D sculpting for a good period wants that one to fall. I don't know of many people that actually enjoy the act of it, especially if you're on a time frame or if you've got a deadline or something like that. Now, if it's a personal side project and you find the act of creating those edge loops and retopology um, cathartic, cool. Do you? That's great. I do that myself sometimes. However, I don't have the time to actually dive into that. So I would much rather focus and have a AI helper or something like that help me retopologize that set. Now you're starting to see some of that come across with the retopologizers and ZBrush, and I believe there's another one in 3D Code. And there's also a really nice one, but it's pretty expensive, and on Blender 3D that helps it. The function or action of retopologizing is changing rapidly, but eventually we're going to get to a point where you select your model, you tell it what functions, what parts to break it down into, and then you're going to start to getting retopologized bases or chunks based off of what you need. So um, the day's not here yet, but it is coming. Like for instance, and I got a chance to talk to Tim Sweeney. Their vision for Unreal Engine 6 is to be able to take a full-blown model based off of either OBJ or FBX file or USD file and drag and drop that into the scene, and then you create target points for where your certain points of rotation would be, like your shoulders, your neck, your torso, your pelvis, your knees, your ankles. Once it determines that those parameters, uh, it can then automatically skin and weight your model, and then give it a control a control tool set to allow you to animate it. And they're looking at having all of this being automatic thing. And what I'm starting to see is that they're starting to deliver on this. I still think they're about 2 years fully away from that full type of functionality, but it's definitely coming. So in terms of like how and where you want to spend your time fine tuning skill sets, look at the landscape on some of these things, and so you can get a good feel for how you can best utilize your time. Because for me, when I look at, okay, if I'm going to spend time doing absolutely realistic humans, I'm going to spend time learning how to sculpt these humans. Is that a good use of my time, or am I better off using meta humans and then starting to use the time that I would use on making humans? Instead of doing that, spend that time learning how to do hard surface modeling so I can make my spaceships or my guns or anything like that much better, even though, as opposed to doing the heavy lifting of making a realistic character that's acceptable within AAA foundations. I mean, when you're looking at that these days, unless it's a stylized type of game, the idea of doing a stylized character is much more appealing than trying to go and nail realism, especially these days when we're looking at things like metahuman. You're looking at things like photogrammetry to create and get the actual likeness of a person, as opposed to someone going in and sculpting it. So those are things I think you need to really think about. How much stylization am I going to go with? How much stylization can I rely on, and even at all, or am I just trying to go hyper realistic and photorealistic? Photorealistic, hyper realistic is expensive. It's expensive not only in performance, it's expensive in execution. So those are the type of things you really need to think about as you go into that. Now, excuse me. That all set up, there are a number of things that can come into play there when you think about it. Um, First thing, when you're thinking about these partners, um, what type of tools do they make? Type of tools, plugins. As I was saying before, what value does that situation bring you? Can you be a tester? Like for instance, there's a gentleman that wants me and the team at OVFX to test his character facial rigs. That's like a drag and drop type of setup that works directly in Unreal Engine. So he wants us to take our frog characters and do test rigs based off of that, and then give him feedback on how it would work. So we get to like use his tool for free, get it set up, and then he also gets to use the tool and get feedback, as well as some promotion based off of us using his tool in the system. So, kind of like looking at win-win situations when you're looking at your partnerships. How can you bring value to you, and how can you also bring value to your partner in those ways? And for us, in that terms, having a tool that's dedicated fully to being able to pick the bones on a facial rig so that we can quickly animate expressions is pretty valuable to us. So that brings a lot of value to us in that end. And that's also a plug-in situation as well. Looking at down the road for us, we need like a partnership with someone that likes doing clothing and then can work really well not only in design, but marvelous designer as well. So types of things like that, they just come off the tip of my head in terms of like partnerships or strategic partnerships that you need. What can they provide that you don't have? I think that's the first question you need to ask yourself. Another thing is asset stores. Now, that's not a partnership as much as that's a database for you to use whenever you're stuck or you might need some type of example of something to work out of. I think those are the best times to have those. I think everyone should have a some type of chest of tools that they can go into that are theirs perpetually and that are happen to be digital assets that you can drop in. Like, for instance, you don't want to spend too much time making things like chairs and desks and lamps and sofas unless they're going to be something particularly stylized about it. It's better off to go in and buy that stuff because buying it is going to be significantly cheaper in terms of how much time you have for development as opposed to actually just making it. Like, for instance, you think about it, if it takes you 2 days to make a photorealistic couch, um, if you break that down in cost, if you're paying yourself $30 an hour, you just spent, what's that, 38 times 8, 160, almost $300 for that couch. You probably could have got that same couch on something like Turbo Squid for $20. You might have found a free couch, so it's those type of situations you got to weigh how much is it worth for you. Another example for this one I can tell you was I was at a place and the executive producer was hell bent on having fruit. He wanted all this type of fruit done. He wanted it sculpted and then he wanted it cell shaded. And then I'm like, what's the point of sculpting it if you're going to just cell shade it to look like geometry? Nevertheless, I was like, just buy it. Freaking buy it. And instead of spending a full blown paycheck, 2 weeks making fucking fruit, I'm sorry, making freaking fruit, go on and actually buy the fruit off a Turbo Squid. $120, you're done. And all of a sudden, not only do we have that, we got the textures, we got the layout, you got the UVs, and he's ready to spend 2 weeks' salary on 3D artists to make fruit that's already been done 100 times over. So sometimes, I'm sorry, I sounded credulous about that. There's nothing personal about that one, but sometimes stupid stuff does pop off like that during the industry. And especially, if you're not the one paying for it, you'll do silly stuff like that. But I'm of the reminder, I try to, when I'm making these decisions, I try to make that decision as if it were my money, And so, I can think, and I find it that owners or proprietors of certain of certain um, projects that I've worked on in the past, they found it rather insulting that you'd rather just throw their money around and do it lazily as opposed to finding a way to problem solve it efficiently. So, get in the habit of thinking things like that way. And instead of looking like a worker, you look like you're coming off as sharp. All right. Okay. So that's a long-winded set about asset source. And then you have other parts. Like, for instance, for my secondary endeavors for Project Hellfire, you've got code outsourcing. Code outsourcing is something that could be negotiable. For instance, a friend of mine who's a much more talented coder than I is going to help me with my interfaces for my project, but I don't have to pay him in cash. I had an extra um, uh, 20-inch Wacom tablet. I just happened to have one. So I traded that Wacom tablet for his services. And so far it's working out really well. So we were able to, start a partnership based off of some trade versus actual sweat equity. And right now we're starting to develop these other side projects when we're not working with the OVFX stuff. So it's been kind of neat. So, when it talks about, you're outsourcing for code, or outsourcing for art, like for instance, he's got another game that he's working on. I'm helping him do some sketch concept art and allows me to, not get rusty too much on my design side. So it's a win-win on that type of thing. So in terms of talking about making partnerships, well, again, I think the one thing to take away from all of this is what can that partnership provide that you don't have or have trouble attending. And it could be, like I said, a number of things. It could be art, could be music. Um, and now the question other is how do you get across and meet these people? As I said before, conventions, setting up connections on LinkedIn. Um, uh, I would say those are the two fastest to start with. Cold calling, you'd be amazed at how much when you just want to cold call someone on LinkedIn just to reach out and say, hey, I'm a fan of yours. Um, is it okay if we connect? You'd be surprised at how many times people say yes. especially if you have something that's shown and that you're looking that you're aspiring to. So, those are some things I think that you can take into account and think about as you're thinking about tech partners or building up your partnerships. In terms of looking at how we do it, those are the first things that come to mind for me. But if there's anything else that I can think of, I'll definitely add to it. But as of right now, those are some of the parts that I can come in and go with. All right, so folks, I think that's pretty much it. I won't be long-winded about it. I think I've explained and talked enough on that end. I hope that what I said was a bit more informative and that it's give you some food for thought. Obviously, if you have any questions about that, or if you want to take the conversation a bit further, we can absolutely do that. At the moment, I'm looking at a time frame where I can be actually available, like open office hours. I'm looking to make that like say Mondays from like 4:30 to 5:30. Just pretty much have an open Discord. You can just come in, and if you need to talk about certain things, we'll be there, or I'll be there um, to have a conversation about it. So I'm going to work on getting that open. And I also see that we have assignments due for our game design document, and I see a good number have already started. Now, remember the last time, Lord, the open window for being able to hand those in will be up until November 9th. So you still have some time. It's just that I started taking those in now. So if anybody wants to add or change some things to their design document, feel free to do that, and I won't give any penalty on that end. I want this stuff to be fun. Um, it's bad enough that you got to listen to me go on and just dribble and talk for 10, 15 minutes at a segment. But I also want you to be able to take some of this time, and hopefully some of this will allow you to have a framework so that you can start to create some of your own visions and actually have some fun with all the other type of crap that you got to work with that's not fun while you're in school. So anyway, there we are with that. I bid everybody adieu, and I hope you have a good night. And if you have any questions, of course, you can reach me at waltc@ovfx.com, or you can reach me on the email directly to our U-Bolt section. Either one will work, and I'll get back with you as soon as possible. Hope you're having a good evening. Talk to you soon.